The rain did not fall that night. It attacked. It came sideways across the moors of Ashenvale, like a punishment from something older than God, lashing the torches along the estate walls until their flames bent and bled, and finally surrendered to the dark. The cobblestones of Blackmere Manor's rear courtyard became rivers. The iron gates groaned against their hinges, as though the night itself were trying to escape the grounds. She was already running. Her name was Isadora Vane, and she had exactly 3 minutes before they discovered the body. She did not look like a woman in danger. She looked like a ghost, white-faced, dark-haired, dressed in the charcoal gown of a household secretary, with a leather satchel pressed hard against her ribs. Her shoes were soaked through. Her hands were steady. Her eyes were the eyes of someone who had spent months planning this exact moment, calculating every variable, accounting for every guard rotation, every unlocked corridor, every distraction she had carefully engineered, and had just watched all of it collapse in the span of 40 seconds. She had not planned for Lord Harwick to change his supper schedule. She had not planned to be seen. And she had not planned for the things she now carried in that satchel. The thing she had pulled from behind the false wall panel in the East Study, the thing that Lord Harwick had spent 11 years hiding from the world, to be quite so devastating. She knew, with absolute certainty, that if Harwick's men caught her before she cleared the estate walls, she would not be turned over to the magistrate. There would be no trial. There would be no witnesses. She had seen what happened to the last secretary, who had asked too many questions. They'd found him floating in the Ashenvale River 3 weeks later, his hands bound behind his back, his expression one of terrible surprise. She ran harder. The rear courtyard was dark. She had arranged that, at least, the 2 torches flanking the servants' exit had been doused an hour ago, the wicks quietly soaked in a solution she'd spent a fortnight perfecting. Small triumphs. The gate latch was corroded. She knew exactly how to lift it without the shriek of rust. She had practiced it 14 times. She was through and into the lane beyond the estate walls before the first shout rose from inside the manor. They had found him, Lord Harwick's private secretary. The real one, the one who had caught her in the study, lay unconscious on the library floor with a knot on the back of his skull, and, she dearly hoped, nothing more permanent than a headache and a wounded pride awaiting him when he woke. She was not a killer. She had made her decisions carefully. But the line between what she was willing to do and what she was not had moved considerably in the past hour, and she was no longer entirely certain where it sat. The lane behind the manor was empty. The storm had driven every sensible person indoors, which meant the only people who would be outside tonight were either searching for her or had no choice in the matter. She moved east toward the main road, calculating distance. The village of Thornwick was 4 miles. She had no horse. The post road beyond was another 2 miles past that. She had perhaps 20 minutes before Harwick's riders reached the lane. She was not going to make it on foot. And then she saw it, standing beneath the massive elm at the road's edge, as though it had always been there, as though the storm had placed it specifically in her path. A carriage, black, enormous, drawn by 4 horses, midnight dark, their breath steaming in the cold, wet air. The coachman's box was empty. The horses stood with the patient stillness of creatures long accustomed to waiting. No crest on the door, no livery on the horses. Not Harwick's. She knew Harwick's carriages intimately, had inventoried them as part of her duties. This was something else, something private. She hesitated for exactly 2 seconds, which was longer than she could afford. She did not hesitate because she was afraid of stealing a carriage. She hesitated because something about it felt wrong in a way she could not articulate. The way a room feels wrong before you understand that someone else is already inside it. But the shout behind the estate walls was growing louder. A torch had appeared at the gate, and her body made a decision that her instincts were still debating. She went to the horses, spoke low into the nearest ear. Old habit, years of country childhood before the world had taken everything from her, and climbed to the coachman's box. The reins were in her hands. The whip she did not touch. She had no need of it. She clicked her tongue, and the 4 black horses moved as one into the dark and rain-lashed road. She drove east, fast. The carriage swayed on the rutted lane, its wheels throwing arcs of mud, the lanterns on its sides dark and cold, as though they had not been lit in some time. She did not look behind her. She focused on the road, on the horses, on the distance she needed to cover before she could think about what came next. She had been driving for perhaps 4 minutes when the voice came from inside the carriage. Low, unhurried, utterly without surprise. You're holding the reins too tightly. The near horse favors his left foreleg. Ease up. Isadora Vane did not scream. She did not drop the reins. She did not, despite every impulse of the body, flinch. What she did was something that would have startled anyone who knew her, which was no one, now. She laughed. A single breath of sound, quiet and almost inaudible beneath the rain, because the universe had an extraordinary and deeply unfunny sense of timing, and she had just realized she was trapped. She eased up on the near rein. The horse's gait smoothed immediately. "Thank you," she said, with the careful evenness of someone dismantling a weapon they've never handled before. Silence from inside the carriage. She could not see him. The small panel between the coachman's box and the carriage interior was shut. The voice had come to the thin wall of lacquered wood, as though through a confessional screen, and she was profoundly aware that she did not know what she was confessing to yet. The road forks in approximately half a mile. The voice said, "If you take the left branch, you will reach the post road in 8 minutes. If you take the right, you will circle back toward Blackmere Manor in 20. "I'm aware," she said. "Then you know that the men currently riding out of Blackmere South Gate will reach the fork in approximately 12 minutes, which means if you take the left branch, you will arrive at the post road with 4 minutes to spare." A pause. Barely. She said nothing. She was thinking very quickly. "You are not a coachman," he said. It was not a question. "You are not a footman. You are not a stable hand. The way you spoke to the horse suggests someone who learned to ride young in open country before they learned to perform subservience." Another pause, this one longer. "You came from a manor. I'm a traveler who needed a conveyance." "You are a traveler who needed this conveyance," he said. "Specifically, you were watching the road. You knew the coachman had gone inside to wait out the rain. You made a calculation. People make calculations. Not like that one." His voice did not change pitch or pace, but something in it shifted, the way a current shifts beneath still water. "What did you take from Harwick's study?" The rain hammered the roof of the carriage. The horses ran on. Isadora's hands tightened on the reins by precisely the amount she could not prevent, and no more. "I don't know what you mean," she said. "Lord Harwick's East study," the voice said. "Second floor. False panel behind the Flemish portrait. The one with the man in the red doublet whose eyes are slightly too far apart to be anatomically plausible. You were inside that room for approximately 7 minutes before his secretary disturbed you. Whatever you retrieved, it is currently in the satchel against your left side." A very brief silence. "You are pressing your arm against it even now." She stopped pressing her arm against it. The fork appeared in the rain-blurred road ahead. She took the left branch without hesitation and felt the carriage lean into the turn. The horses needed no encouragement. "Who are you?" she asked. No answer. "Why are you in this carriage 11 o'clock at night on an unmaintained estate lane with no coachman, no crest, and no lanterns?" She kept her voice level, conversational, almost as though they were discussing the weather rather than the fact that she had just committed theft, assault, and carriage theft in the space of an hour, and was apparently being catalogued by someone she couldn't see. That's an unusual circumstance, even by aristocratic standards. "I was waiting," he said simply. "For what?" "I hadn't decided yet." She filed that answer away and did not pursue it, because they had arrived at the post road, and she needed to decide very quickly what she was going to do next. Stop and run, leaving the carriage and its unknown occupant behind? Continue east toward Grey Hollow, the nearest town large enough to lose herself in? Or, and this was the option her mind kept returning to with the insistence of something that understood self-preservation better than she did, stay exactly where she was? She had stolen a man's carriage. He had not called for help. He had not threatened her. He had given her information that made her escape more efficient. He knew she had taken something from Harwick, and he had not asked what was a second time. In her experience, powerful men who didn't push for answers they wanted were either very patient or very dangerous. She pulled the horses to a walk. "There's a coaching inn at the edge of Thornwick," she said. "I can leave you there. I'll need..." She calculated rapidly. One of the horses. The dark one with the blaze. He's the fastest. You'd leave me a carriage with 3 horses and take the 4th. I'd leave you a carriage with 3 horses and an apology. And if I told you that taking the horse would be unnecessary? She waited. If I told you, he continued, that the men pursuing you from Blackmere Manor are not merely Lord Harwick's household guards, that at least 2 of them ride under a commission you would recognize, and that riding alone through Thornwick tonight would end your journey considerably more permanently than it began, what would you do with that information? Isadora Vane sat very still on the coachman's box. Rain ran down the back of her neck. The horse's breath rose in white clouds ahead of her. I would ask, she said carefully, why a man who was sitting alone in a dark carriage on a deserted estate lane at 11 at night would have any knowledge of who rides under what commission. You would be right to ask that. I'm asking. The panel behind her, the small wooden shutter between box and interior, slid open. She did not turn around. She was not sure why. Some instinct told her that turning around was a kind of surrender she wasn't ready to make. My name, said the voice very close now, is Calder Ashmore. The reins went slack in her hands for a moment. Just a moment. Calder Ashmore, the Duke of Enmore. She knew the name the way everyone in the kingdom knew it. Not through introduction or acquaintance, but through the particular quality of silence that fell over rooms when it was spoken. He was 34 years old, unmarried, holder of the 2nd largest estate in the northern provinces, member of the Privy Committee on Crown Securities, and widely regarded in aristocratic circles as the most dangerous man in any room he entered. Not because of his rank, not because of the sword he was rumored to carry beneath his coat, but because of the expression he wore when other men lied to him. Flat, patient, like a man watching a clock run down. 3 lords had resigned their seats in the past year following private meetings with the Duke of Enmore. One had emigrated. One had suffered a sudden crisis of health. You were watching Blackmere Manor, she said. You were watching him. Harwick. No answer, which was, she was learning, a form of confirmation. Then you know what's in this study, she said. You know about the panel. You knew what was behind it. I had a theory. And you let me, she stopped, processed. You let me go in and retrieve it. I had no authority to enter the manor myself, he said. Lord Harwick and I are known acquaintances. My presence on his grounds without invitation would have been noted, challenged. The document, if it is what I believe it to be, would have been moved or destroyed before I could act on it formally. Isadora sat with that for a long moment. You needed someone to go in who wouldn't be recognized, she said. Someone who already had access. Someone Harwick trusted enough to employ in his household. She paused. Did you know about me? I knew there was a secretary in Harwick's household who had been quietly assembling evidence for the better part of a year. I did not know it was a woman. Does that change your assessment? It improves it considerably. The rain began to ease. Not stop, just ease, pulling back from its frenzy into something steadier and colder. The road ahead gleamed like a mirror. Isadora could see the dim lights of Thornwick, perhaps a mile distant, small and orange and remote. The men behind us, she said. The ones riding under commission. Whose commission? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. The Earl of Ravenscroft, he said. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. She felt the ripples move through her. The Earl of Ravenscroft, Harwick's patron, the man who had placed Harwick in his current seat, the man whose name appeared, in carefully encoded notation, in at least a dozen of the documents she had spent the past 9 months secretly copying in the small hours of the morning, by a candle she kept beneath the lip of her desk, so the light wouldn't be visible under her door. The man whose seal, she knew it now with a certainty that tightened her chest, was on the document in her satchel. How many? She asked. Riders? 4, I believe. Possibly 5. He paused. They will not stop at the coaching inn. She understood him. She understood the shape of what he was offering and what it cost. And she understood, with a particular clarity that comes from having no good options, that she was going to have to decide in the next 30 seconds whether she trusted this man, this feared, silent, politically entangled duke with his empty carriage and his watching eyes, enough to share a vehicle with him for the next several hours. She slid the panel shut. "Move to the right side of the carriage interior," she said. "I'm coming inside." He was not what she expected. They never were the dangerous ones. She had expected a cold. She had expected the particular kind of handsome that serves as armor, symmetrical, polished, designed to be admired from a distance. What she found when she opened the carriage door and climbed in from the box, rain-soaked and sharp-eyed and braced for anything, was a man sitting in the far corner of the dark interior with his long legs angled to one side and his gray eyes moving over her face with the unhurried attention of someone reading a map. He was tall. She could see that even seated, dark-haired, slightly past the fashionable length, with none of the pomade or powder that aristocratic men his age habitually wore. His coat was black and well-made and bore no decoration. His hands, resting on one knee, were the hands of someone who used them for more than correspondence. There was a scar along the left jaw, thin and pale with age, that no fashionable portrait would have included. The carriage moved. She had set the horses to a steady trot before leaving the box, trusting the road and their training. They would carry the vehicle at pace without guidance for a time. Enough time. "Sit down," he said. "You're dripping on the seat leather." "I'm dripping on my own seat leather," she said. "I stole this carriage." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was a ghost of one, glimpsed and gone, like a candle in a window of a house you pass at speed. "Isadora Vane," he said. "Age 26. Born in Crest Hollow, Westermark Province. Father was a land surveyor. Deceased 8 years ago under circumstances that were ruled accidental by a coroner who owed his appointment to the Earl of Ravenscroft. Mother, deceased 12 years. No siblings. Educated at the Aldermere Ladies' Academy on a merit scholarship, one of 4 awarded that year, the only one from a family without noble lineage." He paused. "You enter Harwick's employ 14 months ago as a household secretary, presenting credentials that were impressive." "They were real," she said. "They were real and they were constructed," he said, "which is a distinction that matters. You didn't forge your qualifications. You earned them, but the identity you presented, the name, the history, the letters of reference, those were built." She sat. The carriage rocked. Outside, the rain continued its steady work. "You've been investigating me," she said. "I've been investigating Harwick. You appeared in the investigation approximately 3 months ago." He tilted his head slightly. "You were more careful than most. The false identity was quite good, but you used the same handwriting in 2 letters of reference that were supposedly written by 2 different men." She closed her eyes briefly. The Pemberton letter. She had written it tired, at 2 in the morning, after copying 8 pages of Harwick's private correspondence by candlelight. She had known the moment she sealed it that the hand was too similar. "Why didn't you move against me then?" she asked. "Because you were finding things I couldn't." The frankness of it was disarming. She had expected evasion, the aristocratic habit of wrapping truth in so many layers of implication and plausible deniability that the truth itself became theoretical. He had simply said it. "What do you think I found tonight?" she asked. "I think," he said, "you found the Kessenden Agreement." The name moved through her like cold water. The Kessenden Agreement. She had not known its name until she had read it. Crouching behind a desk in Harwick's East study with her heart hammering and the rain loud against the window. It had no title. It was 6 pages of closely written text in a cipher she had spent 2 months learning to break, because the cipher had appeared in fragments in half a dozen of the documents she had already copied. She had assembled the key painstakingly, letter by letter, over weeks of quiet evenings. And when she had finally decoded the fragments, she had understood why the cipher was necessary. The Kessenden Agreement was a compact between 7 of the kingdom's most powerful noble houses. It described, in precise and damning language, a plan that had been in operation for 11 years, a plan to ensure that the succession of the crown passed not through the established line, but through a manufactured crisis that would place a specific candidate, a candidate whose parentage was not what the kingdom believed it to be, on the throne. 7 houses, 7 seals, and at the bottom of the 6th page, in the cipher she now knew by heart, the confirmation that the plan had already succeeded in its first phase, that the crisis was not coming. It had already happened. The current king's eldest son, The crown prince was not who he was believed to be. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Known with certainty? 3 months." He paused. "Suspected for much longer. And you've done nothing." "I've done nothing visible," he said. There was a weight to the distinction. Visible action against 7 of the kingdom's most powerful houses, without irrefutable documentation, would have resulted in my death before the week was out. Lord Harwick discovered 2 years ago that I was investigating. I have been navigating that knowledge very carefully. He knows you're watching him. He knows I suspect him. He doesn't know what I found or how much. He looked at her steadily. He didn't know about you until tonight. The carriage swayed. Isadora pressed her fingers against the satchel. "The 6th seal on the agreement," she said quietly. "The one I didn't recognize." He said nothing. "It's yours," she said. The silence that followed was the longest of the night. Longer than the silences on the box. Longer than the pause between seeing the carriage and deciding to take it. It was a kind of silence that has a texture. Dense, careful, aware of itself. "Yes," he said. She was on her feet before the word finished, her back against the carriage door, her hand on the latch. Outside, the road was dark and wet and moving at a trot, 4 feet to the ground. She could survive it. She had survived worse. "Sit down," he said. "Tell me why I should." "Because if I were here to silence you, you would already be silent. No inflection, no urgency. Because I have had multiple opportunities tonight to prevent you from leaving that estate with those documents, and I chose not to take them. And because something shifted in his expression, subtle as the turning of a tide, what you see on that document is not what it appears to be. A conspiracy to falsify royal succession seems fairly self-evident. My seal appears on a document I was given under false pretenses," he said. "I was told I was signing a letter of financial compact, a matter of shared land administration in the eastern provinces. I signed it 6 years ago before I understood what Ravenscroft was building." He paused. "When I understood, it was too late to remove my name without confirming that I knew, which would have made me either a conspirator to be managed or a threat to be eliminated." She stared at him. "So you've been trapped," she said. "I've been compromised," he said, with the precision of a man who does not accept softened language for unpleasant truths. "Compromised and surveilled and quietly threatened for 4 years. The only way out is to bring down the entire structure at once. Every name, every seal, every transaction. A partial exposure doesn't end it. It only ends me." Isadora did not sit, but she released the door latch. "And the woman in my position," she said slowly, "who went into that study and took that document, who is now in this carriage. What does she represent to you?" "The possibility," he said, "of ending it." They did not speak again for a long time. The carriage carried them through the dark, the horses finding their own rhythm on the emptying road. Thornwick's lights appeared and fell behind them. He had told her not to stop there, and she had agreed, which was itself a kind of decision she would examine later when she had the luxury of examining anything. She opened the satchel at last and took out the document. Even in the carriage's dark, she knew its weight. The slightly waxy texture of the paper, the smell of old ink, and the particular damp of a room that had housed secrets for a decade. He produced a small lantern from beneath the seat. She had not seen it there, and lit it with a precise, unhurried motion. The light was low and amber. It fell across his face and across the pages in her hands and across the careful distance between them. She read, not the whole of it. She had already read it twice in the study, parsed its cipher, understood its architecture. She read the signatures. All 7 seals. She had identified 5 in the study. The 6th she had recognized in the carriage. The 7th she had not been able to place. She looked up. "This one," she said, pointing to the 7th seal, a device she had never seen, a tower struck by lightning, quartered with a crescent. He leaned forward slightly to look, and for a moment his face was fully in the lamplight, and she saw something there she had not expected. Not calculation, not the cold attention she'd been braced for. Something older and heavier. Grief, perhaps, or its close cousin. The thing that lives in people after grief has done its work and left. "The Countess of Marin," he said. Isadora went very still. The Countess of Marin was the Crown Prince's godmother. She sat on the Royal Advisory Council. She was 60 years old, widowed, enormously wealthy, and universally regarded as one of the most morally upright figures in the kingdom. She had founded 3 charitable institutions. She had publicly denounced corruption in the noble houses on 4 separate occasions. She was a woman whom reformers cited when they wanted to demonstrate that nobility was not uniformly rotten. She was also, apparently, the 7th architect of a plan to manufacture a fraudulent king. She approached me, Isadora said very quietly, 2 years ago, before I entered Harwick's house. She approached me and told me she had evidence of wrongdoing in Harwick's household, and that she needed someone she could trust to go inside and find the proof. She stopped. She gave me the false identity, the letters of reference, the name, Vane. She told me it had been her mother's name. The Duke of Venmore sat very still. She sent you, he said. She sent me, Isadora confirmed. And now her seal is on the document that proves she was part of the conspiracy the entire time. The carriage rocked. Outside, an owl called from somewhere in the dark trees. She sent you to retrieve the document, he said slowly, knowing you would find her name on it. Or, Isadora said, and the word fell into the silence like a key into a lock. She sent me to retrieve the document so she could intercept me before I had a chance to read it, or before I had a chance to understand what I was looking at. But you decoded the cipher. I decoded it 3 weeks ago. I didn't tell her. She met his eyes. I stopped sending her reports a month ago. I told her I was still working on the panel's mechanism. She believed me or pretended to. She sent a message last week asking when I expected to find something conclusive. Isadora paused. She had stopped asking about Harwick. She was asking about the document specifically. He was quiet for a long time. She watched him think. Not the performance of thought, but the actual process, the way his gaze moved to a middle distance and his hands went still. She has been managing the investigation from beginning, he said, setting Harwick up as a visible target, while protecting the agreement itself. If you had come out of that study with the document and delivered it directly to her, she would have destroyed it, and you would have served your purpose and become a liability. And instead, Isadora said, I'm in a stolen carriage and reign with the only other person in the kingdom whose name is on the document. Yes. She looked down at the pages, at the 7 seals, at the years of careful, patient treachery they represented. I need to ask you something, she said. Ask. The crown prince, if he is not who the kingdom believes him to be, if the succession was falsified, what does that mean? For him? He doesn't know. He was an infant when this was arranged. Something passed across the Duke's face that she could not fully read. No, he said. He doesn't know. Who is he? A pause, long and heavy with something she couldn't name. His mother was the youngest daughter of Lord Kessenden, he said, the man for whom the agreement was named. She died in childbirth. The child was placed in the royal household by Dravenscroft, who had cultivated a position as the Queen's most trusted adviser. The Queen was grieving her own lost children. She believed the boy was the King's. And the King believed what he was told. He stopped. The King is dying. He has perhaps 3 months. When he dies, the prince ascends, and 7 houses will own him because they will have the documentation of his true parentage, and he will sign whatever they place before him. The lamplight flickered. The rain had stopped. In the sudden quiet, Isadora could hear the rhythm of the horses, the creak of the carriage, her own breathing. That's why the document matters, she said. Not to expose the prince, to use against him, to control him. Yes. She thought about the Countess of Marin, her measured voice, her kind eyes, the way she had spoken about justice and duty and the necessity of courage. She thought about the night the Countess had come to her in the small room she had been renting in the city, had sat across from her and said, I know what happened to your father, Miss Vane. I know who ordered the coroner's report falsified. And I know you are not the kind of woman who stops looking for the truth just because the truth is dangerous. She had been right about that last part. At least, the men Dravenscroft sent, Isadora said. They're not just looking for the document. No, they're looking for me. Specifically, you decoded the cipher. You know what's in the agreement. Even without the physical document, you are a liability. A witness, he said, which is more dangerous. She understood. A document could be contested, could be argued as forgery. A living person who could testify to the contents, who had spent 9 months inside Harwick's household and could speak to 12 months of accumulated evidence. That was harder to dismiss and much simpler to remove. My father, she said, he found something too, didn't he? He said nothing. He was a land surveyor, she said. He died 8 years ago, ruled accidental. I was 17. I've spent 8 years trying to understand why. She looked at him steadily. He was surveying the eastern provinces, the same eastern provinces in this agreement, the land administration compact that you thought you were signing. The land surveys, he said slowly, were part of it. The agreement required documentation of certain border territories that had been quietly reallocated over the preceding decade. Surveys that confirmed those reallocations would be problematic. My father refused to falsify his survey, she said. He held her gaze. I believe so. She had known this for 2 years. She had suspected it for 6. The knowing had never stopped feeling like a new wound. She breathed through it. I want Ravenscroft, she said. Not just the document, not just the exposure. I want him specifically. I want what he did to my father on record, under seal, in front of witnesses who cannot be silenced. That will require more than one document, he said. I have more than one document. She patted the satchel. I have been copying Harwick's papers for 14 months. I have 3 separate caches, in 3 separate locations, with 3 separate couriers who don't know each other and don't know my real name. Tonight's document is the final piece. She paused. I had a plan. It didn't involve you. What was the plan? Deliver the agreement to a journalist at the Northern Intelligencer, the only broadsheet not owned directly or indirectly by the 7 houses. Have the caches of supporting documents released simultaneously through the couriers. Create a disclosure that was too distributed to suppress. He considered this. It's not bad. It would have worked. It would have gotten you killed within 48 hours, he said, with no particular drama. Ravenscroft controls the city magistracy. He would have had you arrested on fabricated charges before the second broadsheet ran. The Intelligencer's offices have burned down twice in the past decade. She said nothing because she had known this. She had known it and planned to run afterward and hoped the running would be enough because she had not had a better option. There is a meeting of the Privy Committee on Crown Securities in 4 days, he said. I have a seat on that committee. If the agreement and the supporting documents are presented directly to the committee in session with testimony, the procedure requires that the evidence be formally entered into record before any response can be taken. It cannot be burned or buried. It becomes part of the Royal Archives by law. You have a seat on the committee, she said, but your seal is on the agreement. Yes. So you would be testifying against yourself. I would be testifying against Ravenscroft and presenting evidence that my signature was obtained through deception, which is a defensible position. He paused. It is also the only position I have. She looked at him, this careful, guarded, complicated man sitting in the corner of his own stolen carriage, and understood something that the past several hours had been assembling slowly without her full awareness. He was not offering her protection. He was offering her a partnership between 2 people who had been maneuvered into the same impossible position by the same ruthless hands. He needed her evidence. She needed his access. The Countess of Marin had sent her into that study believing she would retrieve the agreement and deliver it directly, never knowing Isadora had decoded the cipher, never knowing about the other caches. The Countess had underestimated her. Harwick had underestimated her. Ravenscroft had never known she existed. For days, she said. For days. I need to reach the first cache before then. It's in Grey Hollow, with a bookseller named Aldous Fenwick. She watched his face for any reaction to the name. There was none that she could read. If Harwick's men report to Ravenscroft tonight, and they will, he'll know I have the document by morning. He'll start closing roads. Then we need to be in Grey Hollow by morning. She leaned back against the carriage seat. Outside the windows, the night was beginning to thin at its edges. Not dawn, not yet, but the first rumor of it, the dark loosening slightly at the seams. There's something you haven't told me, she said. He waited. You were parked on that lane tonight. You knew Harwick's household schedule. You knew about the false panel. She paused. You had a theory about the agreement. But theories don't put you on a dark lane in the rain without a coachman. She looked at him. Who told you tonight was a night? The long silence returned. This one had a different quality. Not the silence of someone choosing words, but of someone choosing whether to speak at all. My coachman, he said at last, went inside Harwick's manor 2 hours before he came out of it. She froze. He has been in Harwick's employ for 3 years, he said. A double position. He drives for me when I travel in this region, and he works for Harwick as an understeward when I do not need him. I knew about it. I allowed it. It gave me access to information I could not obtain otherwise. But tonight, he did not come back out. He said it flatly, carefully, like a man who has had several hours to sit with a thing and still finds it sharp. He was seen entering the manor at 9 o'clock. He has not been seen since. The implications arranged themselves in Isadora's mind with the terrible clarity of a well-set trap closing. Harwick knew, she said. He knew your man was a double agent. He's been feeding you controlled information. I suspected as much. I didn't know when the trap would close. He paused. Tonight, when you came out of those gates and I saw the satchel, I made a calculation. You decided I was more useful than the trap. I decided, he said, that someone who had spent 14 months inside Harwick's household and walked out alive with the agreement in hand was not someone I could afford to let ride away alone into the dark. She absorbed that, all of it, the layers of it. Your man, she said, inside the manor. I know. His voice had not changed, but something in him had gone very still. I'm sorry, she said, and she meant it, which surprised her. She had stopped meaning most things she said in the past 14 months. The careful performance of sympathy and deference and normalcy taking the place of actual feeling. But this she meant. He looked at her for a moment, and something in the gray eyes shifted. Not softened, exactly, but acknowledged, as though he had not expected a condolence, and was uncertain what to do with it. Drive, he said. We have ground to cover. Gray Hollow in the early morning was a town pretending to be asleep. Smoke rose from the bakeries. Cats moved through the lanes with their private business. The bookseller's shop on the corner of Candler Street had a light in the back window even at this hour, which was how Isadora knew Aldous Fenwick was already awake. Because Aldous Fenwick was always already awake, and this was either evidence of a virtuous early rise in character or of an anxious conscience, and she had never been sure which. She went in alone. She had told the Duke to wait with the carriage. He had not argued, which meant either he trusted her or he had already identified the exits and positioned himself accordingly. She suspected the latter. Fenwick was a small man in his 60s with ink-stained fingers and the careful eyes of someone who had spent 40 years reading things that were not meant to be read. He looked up when she came through the door, and his careful eyes went very still. Miss Vane, he said, is the package safe? It is. He didn't move. There were 2 men in the shop yesterday asking about a woman of your description. Said they were looking for a runaway niece. What did you tell them? That I sell books, not information. He paused. But one of them left and one of them stayed. He's been at the tavern across the lane since yesterday evening. He met her eyes. I've been awake all night. She went to the back room. The cash was where she had left it. Inside the fall spine of a 3-volume edition of navigational histories of the eastern provinces, which sat innocuously on the shelf between a gazetteer and a collection of tide tables. She withdrew the oilskin packet, everything intact. She was back in the main room in under 3 minutes. Fenwick was still at his counter, very still, his eyes on the window. He's looking this way, Fenwick said quietly. I know. She touched his hand briefly. Go to your sister's house in Millhaven. Today, take nothing that matters. Don't send word in advance. He looked at her, something in his face, resignation, or perhaps just the particular tiredness of a man who has spent years doing small, dangerous things for a principle he never articulated and never needed to. Is it almost over? He asked. 3 days, she said. She was back at the carriage before the man at the tavern had finished his ale. Second cash, she said, climbing in. Millhaven. But we need to move quickly. Dravenscroft has a watchman in Fenwick shop. He had already moved to the coachman's box. She realized, with a small start, that she had handed him the reins of a carriage she had stolen from him, as though it were the most natural thing in the world, and he had taken them the same way. She sat inside with the 2 packets of documents on her lap, and listened to a horse's wake to a canter beneath his hands. She thought about the Countess of Marin. The Countess was in the capital. She would have received word by now. Not from Harwick, whose communication routes as Adora had quietly disrupted as part of her exit plan, but from a watcher in Fenwick's shop, who would have sent a rider the moment Isadora appeared. The Countess would know the document was out of the house. She would not yet know whether Isadora had read it. She would find out. And then the Countess, kind, principled, charitable, treacherous Countess of Marin, would make a decision. And the decision she made would tell Isadora everything she needed to know about whether there was any path through this that didn't end in blood. She opened the second packet and began, in the rocking carriage, to organize the evidence by date. It was the second night that broke something open between them. They had stopped at a posting house outside Millhaven, not to sleep, but to rest the horses, to eat something, to sit for an hour in a place that was not moving. He had taken 2 rooms under names she didn't ask about. She had brought the documents into her room and spread them across the bed and was still working through them at midnight when the knock came at the door. She opened it. He stood in the corridor with a tray, bread, cold meat, something hot in a covered pot that turned out to be soup. He offered no explanation. She stepped back from the door. He set the tray on the table and looked at the documents on the bed. She watched him look at them. He had still not asked to read them, which she found. She was honest with herself, more unsettling than if he had. Most men in his position would have demanded. Most men would have considered the documents theirs to access, given the circumstances. You should eat, he said. I will when I'm done with this section. He sat in the chair by the window. He didn't leave. She worked. He was quiet. This went on for some time. It was, she reflected later, the most genuinely restful hour she had experienced in 14 months. Not because it was safe. It wasn't. But because the silence between them had become something she didn't need to monitor. He was not performing quietness. He simply was quiet, in the way of someone for whom observation was more natural than speech, and there was no demand in the silence, no waiting agenda. Why did you never marry? She said, without planning to. He looked at her. One brow moved slightly. I'm sorry, she said. I was engaged, he said. 7 years ago. She died. The brevity of it said everything about what the expansion would cost. I'm sorry, she said again, and meant it the same way she'd meant in the carriage. Something about this man kept extracting genuine feeling from her, which was disconcerting in a way she'd examine later. The engagement was arranged, he said. We had met perhaps a dozen times. I cannot claim it was love, but she was, he paused, looking at the window, and the lamplight was kind to nothing in his face and unflattering to everything, and this was somehow exactly right. She was honest with me. She told me she didn't love me either, at the very first meeting, before a word of negotiation had happened. She said, I understand this is a matter of alliance, and I will do my duty, but I will not pretend to have emotions I don't possess. He stopped. I found that remarkable. What happened to her? A fever. Very fast. He turned his head back toward the room, and she saw, briefly, the shape of what he had never fully processed. That particular grief that doesn't resolve because it wasn't simple enough to grieve cleanly. Afterward, the alliance she represented became irrelevant, and I found that I had no interest in arranging another. And no one pressed the matter? People press the matter constantly, he said, with a flatness that held the ghost of some ruined patience. I've simply become very good at standing very still until they stop. She laughed, genuinely, which startled her. It startled him, too, she thought, though his expression only registered it as a slight recalibration. What was your name? He said. Before Vane. She looked at him. Before the Countess gave you an identity, he said. You said the name Vane was her mother's. What was yours? She hadn't spoken it in 2 years. She had almost stopped thinking of it as hers. The self that Carriage had become so thoroughly overlaid with Isadora Vane, household secretary, careful forgery, the performance of a woman she'd invented to survive. Mara, she said. Mara Belisant. My father was Edvard Belisant, surveyor of the eastern provinces. He was quiet for a moment. Mara, he said, not testing it, not using it as a lever, just saying it, the way you say a word you've been reading for a long time and finally hear spoken aloud. No one has called me that in 2 years, she said. I know. He stood. Eat the soup before it goes cold. He went to the door. I'll take the first watch. You don't need to. The Millhaven Road has 2 men on it that I don't recognize, he said simply. I'll take the first watch. He was gone before she could argue. She ate the soup. It was very good. She thought about what it meant that the most feared duke in the northern provinces had found a posting-house kitchen at midnight and procured soup, and she decided that it meant nothing she was currently equipped to process. She found the letter the next morning. It was tucked beneath the door of her room, a single folded sheet, sealed with a crescent and tower in pale gray wax. She had seen that seal once before, the night before by lamplight, on the 7th signature of the Kessenden Agreement. She opened it without waking him. My dear Isadora, I believe you have found what you were looking for. I believe you have also found something you were not looking for, namely, the confirmation that I am not who I presented myself to be. I will not insult you by claiming the circumstances were more complicated than they appear. They were exactly as complicated as they appear. What I will tell you is this. The men your current companion will direct you toward are not safer than the men pursuing you. The Privy Committee on Crown Securities contains 3 members who are part of the agreement. The Duke of Venmore will not have told you this, because he does not know it. He believes a committee is the safest path. He is wrong. If you present those documents before that committee, 2 of the 3 sympathetic members will vote to seal the proceedings, the evidence will be sequestered pending review, and in the 3 weeks that follow will quietly disappear. I am offering you an alternative. There's a member of the Royal Press Council, a woman named Grantham Aldeck, who has been building a case against Ravenscroft for 6 years. She has access to a printing house in the capital that cannot be shut down through normal channels. If you bring the documents to her, she can have them in print and distributed to every city in the kingdom within 18 hours. Not 4 days. 18 hours. Come alone. You know why. M. She read it 3 times. Then she sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the sealed documents in her satchel and thought about trust. The Countess was telling her the committee was compromised. She had no way to verify this without access she didn't have. If it was true, the Duke's plan ended in the evidence disappearing and both of them arrested or dead. If it was false, if this was the Countess's final attempt to retrieve the document before it could be formally entered into record, then going alone to a woman she'd never heard of on the word of conspirator was the last mistake she'd ever make. She stood up, she went to his door, and knocked twice. He opened it immediately. He had not been sleeping. She handed him the letter. She watched him read it. When he finished, he looked up, and she saw something she had not seen from him before. Not the cold attention or the careful thought, but actual uncertainty. The expression of a man encountering a variable he had not accounted for. Grantham Aldeck, he said. You know her? I know of her. She works for the Royal Press Council. She is, he paused, she is legitimate. She has been investigated by Ravenscroft twice and survived both. Is she working against Ravenscroft? I don't know. He set the letter down. I didn't know. He looked at her. If the committee is compromised, the Countess is correct. Presenting the documents there ends us. And if the Countess is lying, then going to Aldeck ends us faster. She looked at him. He looked at her. The morning light came through the window behind him, pale and new. There's a third option, she said. Tell me. Both, she said. We go to Aldeck. We give her copies. I have copies. The supporting documents exist in 3 caches, and the originals can be reproduced. She prints what she has. Simultaneously, we go to the committee with the originals. If the committee tries to seal the proceedings, the printing has already happened. The evidence is already public. They can sequester the documents, but they can't sequester what's already distributed. He was very still. That's extremely dangerous, he said. Everything is extremely dangerous, she said. That's different from impossible. Another long silence. Then, very quietly, something shifted in his expression. The last guard coming down or the first one going up, she couldn't tell, and he said, 2 days. 2 days, she agreed. They did not reach the capital in 2 days without cost. The rider came at them outside Aldervane, a single man, fast, cutting across the field to intercept them. He had a crossbow and the particular purpose of someone who had been given one instruction and was concentrating on nothing else. The Duke had driven the carriage directly at him. She had watched through the window, heart in her throat, as the black horses thundered toward the rider without veering, without slowing, without any of the rational impulses that self-preservation required. The rider had hesitated 1 second too long. His horse shied at the oncoming massive carriage, and then they were past, the bolt having passed the carriage window 6 inches above Isadora's head. She sat with her hand pressed over her heart, and the papers flat against the floor, beneath her feet, where she'd thrown herself. "You drove directly at him," she said, when he climbed back inside at the next stop unhurried, as though he'd done nothing remarkable. It was the fastest resolution. It was completely insane. He looked at her, the almost smile again, barely there. "You were going to be shot." "I was going to—" She stopped, restarted. "Thank you." He nodded once, as though thanks were beside the point. She thought about the bolt that had passed 6 inches over her head and realized that she had not, at any point in the past 2 days, genuinely believed he would let her be harmed. She had not made this decision consciously. Her body had simply arrived at a position that her mind was now catching up to, which was, she recognized, exactly the kind of thing that got people into trouble. She also recognized that trouble of this particular kind was a luxury she had not been able to afford in a very long time, and was apparently unable to prevent herself from affording now. Grantham Aldeck was a woman of 50 with printer's ink under her fingernails and the eyes of someone who had read too much of the truth about the world and could no longer be surprised by it. She read the copies in 12 minutes flat. She did not speak while she read. She turned each page with the careful, deliberate attention of a professional. When she finished, she looked up. "How long do I have before the committee session?" she said. 19 hours. The Duke said, "I can have the first run distributed in the capital in 14. She looked at Isadora. "The Countess sent you to me." "Yes." "She told you the committee was compromised." "Yes." Aldeck turned her gaze to the Duke. Something passed between them, not hostility, but a kind of mutual taking of measure. "3 of your committee members are in agreement," she said. "Not 2, 3. Harwick has been corresponding with a 4th, who hasn't signed but is sympathetic. You present those documents in session. You have a majority against you before the first page is read." He absorbed this. "How do you know about the 4th member?" "Because I've been investigating this for 6 years, and I have sources you don't." She returned to the copies. "You'll still present to the committee. The public record matters. You're right about that. But you need this printed first, and you need the distribution to happen at the same time as the session, not before. If it prints before, Dravenscroft knows what's coming, and he'll have the committee room locked before you reach the door." "Synchronized," Isadora said. "Synchronized," Aldeck confirmed. "I'll need your testimony in writing. Yours specifically, Miss Belisant. Your father's survey. Your recruitment by the Countess. All of it. The personal account is what breaks through to people who don't understand the political architecture." Isadora Vane, Mara Belisant, sat down at the compositor's desk and began to write. The Countess of Marin came in the night. Isadora had expected this. She had not expected her to come alone. The Countess was 60 years old, and she looked every year of it, and also something more than it. The way very old trees look, not just aged but seasoned, worn smooth by everything they've survived. She stood in the doorway of the print house back room and looked at Isadora with an expression that was complex enough to require a longer time than they had to fully read. "You found my name," she said. "I found your name. I sent you in knowing you might." "I know." Isadora looked at her steadily. "I've been working through why. What conclusion have you reached?" "That you wanted out," Isadora said. "That you wanted out for years and couldn't find a way that didn't end in your destruction. That you needed someone to find the document and read it and understand it and survive long enough to use it. Someone who could not be connected to you. Someone expendable. She paused. And that you convinced yourself the expendability was incidental to the justice. The Countess was quiet. Was it? Isadora asked. A very long silence. No, the Countess said. Then why tell me about Aldec? Why give me a real path forward instead of just... Because I am old, the Countess said, and I am tired of choosing the calculation over the person, and because something fractured briefly in her expression, because you reminded me of someone I was a very long time ago, before I learned to be careful. She stopped. I will not ask you to forgive me. I am not sure I deserve it. I'm not sure either, Isadora said, but I'll tell you what I'll do. She stood. I'll give your testimony to Aldec, what you knew and when, what you signed and why and what you've done since. She held the Countess's gaze. All of it, and you'll let her print it. The Countess closed her eyes. Open them. Yes, she said. The session of the Privy Committee on Crown Securities began at 10 o'clock in the morning on the fourth day, with the Duke of Venmore presenting documents to the committee's secretary with the composed precision of someone who has imagined this moment many times and made his peace with all versions of it. At 10 o'clock and 4 minutes, the first printed broadsheet hit the streets of the capital. At 10 o'clock and 11 minutes, the committee member who had been about to call for a procedural halt looked up from the document he was reading and appeared to recalculate something fundamental about his position in the room. By noon, the broadsheets had reached 3 other cities. By 2 o'clock, the Earl of Ravenscroft had left his townhouse through the servants' entrance and was making for the river. He was apprehended at the dockside by 2 members of the Royal Constabulary who had, that morning, read a very detailed account in print of the crimes committed under his commission and found themselves less inclined than usual to look the other way. Lord Harwick resigned his seat at 3. The Countess of Marin presented herself to the committee at 4 o'clock and gave a statement of 2 hours that left 3 committee members pale and 2 more quietly drafting their own letters of resignation. Isadora Vane, Mara Belisant, sat on the steps of the print house in the late afternoon sun and read the broadsheet. Her name was in it. Her father's name was in it. Edvard Belisant, surveyor, who had refused to falsify his maps and had died for it, was in 8 years of careful print on a paper that would be in every corner of the kingdom by tomorrow. She sat with this for a long time. The Duke appeared at the top of the steps. He stood there for a moment, looking at the street the way he always looked at things, all the way through them, at whatever was on the other side. Then he sat down beside her, not close, a careful, considered distance, but beside her. It isn't over, he said. No, she agreed. The Crown Prince. What happens to him? That will take time. Careful work. The king must be told before he dies. What was done, what was believed, what is true. The prince is 20 years old and has done nothing wrong. He'll need, he paused, handling. That's the wrong word. Truth, she said. He'll need the truth. Carefully given but not softened. Yes. They sat in the sun. The street moved around them. People who had read the broadsheet and were talking, gesticulating. The city rearranging its understanding of itself in real time. What do you do now? He asked. She thought about it, about the false name she could set down at last, and the real one she could pick back up, about what a life looked like when you stopped running in one direction long enough to discover you were actually moving toward something. I haven't decided yet, she said. She thought she heard, very faintly, the echo of his own words back at her. From the beginning of this, from a dark lane in the rain when she had asked what he was waiting for. She turned to look at him. He was already looking at her. That's very familiar language, she said. I noticed, he said. The almost smile appeared. This time it stayed slightly longer before it went. She thought about a man who had sat alone in a dark carriage on a deserted lane, waiting for something he hadn't named yet. She thought about what it meant to be that careful, that patient, that guarded, and to have it finally be enough. She thought about her father's name in print, about justice that arrives late and costs everything and is still, somehow, worth what it cost. I have 3 caches of documents that still need proper archiving, she said. Legal archiving. Formal. The kind that requires someone with access to the Royal Registry. I have access to the Royal Registry, he said. I know, she said. I checked. He looked at her. Something moved through his eyes that she recognized now. Not coldness, never coldness, but a particular quality of attention that meant he was present in a way he rarely permitted himself to be. "How long will the archiving take?" she asked. "Several months," he said. "At minimum." "I'll need somewhere to work," she said. "Somewhere with a library, good paper, adequate light, not too far from the capital." He was quiet for a moment. "Venmore House has an east wing that hasn't been used in 4 years," he said. "The library is adequate. The light depends on the season." "I'll manage," she said. The sun was going. The street's noise was shifting from shock to discussion, from discovery to consequence. Somewhere in the city, the mechanisms of justice were grinding into motion, slow and inexorable and long overdue. Mara Belisant, who had been running for 8 years, sat on the steps of a printing house in the late afternoon light and breathed and found that she was not afraid. Beside her, Calder Ashmore, Duke of Venmore, was very still. But it was a different stillness than the one she had first encountered in a dark carriage on a stormy lane. That stillness had been armor. This one was something closer to rest. He did not take her hand. That would come, or it wouldn't, in whatever time the future held. What passed between them was quieter than that, more durable. The particular recognition of two people who have seen each other at their sharpest and most desperate and most unguarded, and have chosen, in spite of, or perhaps because of, all of it, to be in the same place. The carriage was still in the lane behind the print house. For black horses, patient as ever, a vehicle that had, over the course of 4 days, carried a stolen document, a false identity, a real name, two people's grief, one tentative and fragile, and absolutely genuine trust, and the first pieces of justice that was not yet complete, but was, at last, no longer impossible. She stood. He stood. There was still work to do. There was always, in a world like this one, still work to do. But for the first time in 8 years, Mara Belisant walked toward it, not running, not escaping, not diminished by a name that wasn't hers, in the full and certain knowledge of who she was. And beside her, the Duke of Venmore, feared and silent and so much more than some of his reputation, walked with her, into whatever came next. She had stolen the carriage to escape. She had not known what she was riding toward. Sometimes that is the only way truth ever reaches anyone, carried by someone who was running for their life and arrived somewhere entirely unexpected and found, against all reasonable odds, that they were not alone.